I apologize for interrupting, but there is a matter of critical importance that needs to be addressed immediately.
What is this? Speak quickly.
These documents prove your true identity.
You have no place here, Daniel. I believe I do, Amara.
The envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Nothing unusual about that. The city outside my apartment moved in its usual rhythm. Cars stopping at lights below my window, distant sirens, someone laughing on the sidewalk. Rain clouds gathered over the skyline, turning everything silver and quiet. I almost ignored the mail. Bills. Advertisements. Another catalog I never asked for. Then I saw the envelope. Thick cream paper. My name written in elegant black lettering. No return address. For some reason, my stomach tightened before I even opened it. I stood at the kitchen counter for a moment, staring at it. Then I slid my finger beneath the seal. Inside was a wedding invitation. Simple. Expensive. Minimal. And at the center, 2 names. My ex-husband's. And hers. For a second, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. I looked again. Read it twice. Then a third time. The date. The venue. The gold lettering. Everything was real. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes pain arrives dressed so perfectly that your mind mistakes it for a joke. No. I whispered to an empty room. This had to be accidental. Wrong address. Wrong list. Some administrative mistake. But then another card slipped from the envelope. A handwritten note. 3 lines. Hope you can come. No hard feelings. Wishing you happiness too. No signature. None was needed. I sat down slowly. Months. Months since the divorce papers were signed. Months since I stopped asking why late-night meetings became locked phones. Why weekend trips became business emergencies. Why I became someone he barely looked at. And months since he stopped hiding her. The woman everyone politely pretended not to notice until our marriage officially ended. I stared at the invitation again. But before I tell you what happened next, if you enjoy emotional stories that reveal hidden truths and unexpected endings, support the channel. Like this video. Subscribe. Share it with someone who loves dramatic stories. And leave a comment below. Would you attend your ex's wedding, or never look back? Now, back to the story. I remembered the day I signed the papers. He had avoided my eyes. She had appeared online 2 weeks later. Official. Public. Effortless. As if our years together had quietly disappeared. I stared at the invitation again. Why send this? To be kind? To prove something? To show me they won? I walked to the window. Rain finally began tapping against the glass. Part of me wanted to throw the invitation away. Another part of me wanted answers. Not revenge. Not drama. Just something that felt complete. I folded the invitation carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then I looked at the date one more time. And for the first time since the divorce, I wondered whether showing up would reopen old wounds. Or finally close them. I didn't know yet. But that question stayed with me. And over the next few days, it became impossible to ignore. Standing at the window with that wedding invitation in my hands, memories began returning in pieces. Not dramatic moments. Not screaming arguments. Just small things. Small things that eventually become impossible to ignore. There wasn't a single day my marriage ended. It ended quietly. Slowly. Like watching evening light disappear from a room without realizing darkness had already arrived. At first, it was ordinary. He worked late. Answered messages during dinner. Canceled plans. Life gets busy. That is what I told myself. We lived in a crowded part of the city where mornings began with traffic below the apartment, and evenings ended with apartment windows glowing across the skyline. We still shared coffee. Still asked about each other's day. But something had changed. His answers became shorter. His smile stopped reaching his eyes. Then came the phone. It never left his side. Face down at dinner. Taken into the bathroom. Muted at night. One evening, while I was setting plates on the table, his phone lit up on the counter. I wasn't trying to look. I really wasn't. But I saw enough. A name. A heart. One message. Miss you already. I stared for exactly 2 seconds. Then looked away. When he walked back in, he flipped the phone over immediately. Too quickly. Too carefully. I asked quietly, "Is there something you want to tell me?" He looked at me for a second too long, then smiled. "No. You're imagining things." That answer hurt more than the truth. Weeks passed. Distance became routine. Then one afternoon, reality arrived without warning. I was meeting a friend downtown when I saw him. Across the street. Laughing. Relaxed. Holding coffee. Standing beside a woman I had never met, but instantly recognized. Not because I knew her. Because I realized he looked happier with her than he had looked with me in months. He saw me. Our eyes met. And he didn't move away. That was the moment everything became clear. There was no dramatic confrontation. No public scene. That night I sat at our dining table and said, "I don't want explanations anymore." He looked stunned. I continued, "If you already left emotionally, then let's stop pretending." The divorce process moved faster than I expected. A quiet office. A calm attorney. Stacks of paper. Questions asked in professional voices. I signed my name without shaking. He signed his without looking at me. And that was it. Years together reduced to ink. 2 weeks later, their relationship appeared everywhere. Photos. Captions. Celebrations. Public. Official. As though our marriage had simply been a waiting room. I stopped looking after that. Or at least, I thought I had. Until his wedding invitation arrived. And suddenly, the past did not feel finished anymore. I should not have been there. That was what everyone told me. A friend had even grabbed my arm that morning, her voice low and urgent. "Why would you put yourself through that?" I didn't answer her. Because I didn't fully understand the answer myself. But when the time came, I found myself standing outside the venue anyway. The place was nothing like the life I had once shared with him. This was not ordinary wealth. This was presentation. A carefully designed world of polished marble, golden floral arches, and soft orchestral music floating through the air like a performance that had been rehearsed for months. Guests arrived in expensive suits and flowing dresses, laughter perfectly timed, smiles perfectly placed. Everything looked flawless. Everything looked unreal. I stepped inside, and the atmosphere shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for whispers to travel faster than footsteps. "That's her. I heard about the divorce. She actually came?" I kept walking. Slow. Controlled. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I refused to show it. At the far end of the hall, I saw him. My ex-husband. Standing confidently in a tailored suit, surrounded by people who looked at him like he had never failed at anything in his life. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met mine. No surprise. No guilt. Just recognition. Then he looked away. As if I were nothing more than a passing detail in his perfect day. Beside him stood her. The bride. She was stunning in a way that demanded attention rather than invited it. Her dress shimmered under the soft lights, and her posture carried a confidence that felt carefully constructed. She smiled when she saw me. Not warmly, not kindly, but knowingly, like someone who believed they had already won a story that was still unfolding. I felt every gaze in the room settle on me for a moment longer than necessary, but I did not turn away. I found a seat. Not in the front. Not in the back. Just somewhere in between. A place where I could see everything, and yet remain unseen. The music continued. The laughter resumed. The ceremony prepared to begin. But beneath all of it, I could feel something shifting. A tension that no decoration could hide. A quiet anticipation building under the surface of perfection. Because I had not come to stop anything. And I had not come to start anything either. I had come to understand something. And somehow, I already knew this wedding was not going to remain perfect for long. The ceremony had the quiet precision of a stage play. Everything followed timing. Everything followed order. And I realized very quickly that this was not just a wedding. It was a performance. The speeches began after the vows, as glasses clinked softly and guests leaned forward with practiced smiles. One by one, friends of the groom stood up to speak. Each story painted the same picture. A man who was misunderstood. A love story that was fated. a couple that had overcome everything to be together. Laughter followed certain lines. Applause followed emotional pauses. And I sat there listening to a version of reality that felt carefully edited, like a film cut to remove anything inconvenient. No mention of distance. No mention of secrecy. No mention of how quickly everything had replaced what once existed between him and me. Just perfection. Just applause. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Still. Controlled. My expression neutral, even when my name almost came up once. Quickly avoided, like a word someone decided not to say out loud. Across the room, my ex-husband smiled as if every sentence was a confirmation of something he had already decided about himself. The bride sat beside him, glowing under the lights. She would occasionally touch his arm lightly, as if reminding everyone they belonged to each other. And yet, something about her smile felt tight, measured, not entirely relaxed. As if even she was aware that stories like this only stay perfect when no one looks too closely. The air in the room was warm, scented with flowers that were too strong, almost overwhelming. I remember thinking how easily beauty could become pressure. Then, the doors at the back of the hall opened. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just a quiet shift in attention. A man stepped inside. Late. Unannounced. He wore a dark suit, simple compared to the polished elegance around him. He paused for a moment, scanning the room as if confirming he was in the right place. Whispers began almost immediately. Who is that? Is he invited? No one moved toward him. No one welcomed him. Even the groom noticed. His smile faltered for half a second before returning, though it no longer looked as effortless. The bride followed his gaze. Her expression changed. Subtle at first. Then sharper. Recognition. Or something close to it. The man did not wave. Did not smile. He simply stood there, calm in a room that had suddenly forgotten how to breathe normally. And in that moment I felt it. The first crack in the performance. Small. Almost invisible. But real. And whatever was about to happen next was no longer part of the plan. The room was still unsettled after the late arrival. A quiet confusion lingered in the air like a held breath that no one knew how to release. Then the man stepped forward. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just deliberate. He walked toward the front where the groom and bride stood beneath the floral arch, their perfect backdrop suddenly feeling less certain under the weight of his presence. A staff member tried to stop him, but he raised a hand calmly. I only need a minute, he said. His voice was steady. Too steady for a wedding. He turned slightly toward the guests. My name is Daniel Reeves. I was involved in the groom's recent business dealings. A small shift moved through the crowd. The groom's expression tightened immediately. The bride looked at him, confusion forming slowly, like a crack appearing in glass. Daniel continued. I am not here to congratulate anyone. That sentence alone changed the atmosphere. Silence deepened. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. He reached into a folder he carried, and placed a few printed documents on a nearby table. No dramatic gesture. No raised voice. Just facts laid out like evidence waiting to be seen. This is not personal, he added. But it needs to be said in the right room. He looked directly at the groom. Several financial transactions linked to your company were misrepresented. Investors were not given full disclosure. And certain agreements were signed under conditions that were not transparent. A ripple went through the guests. Whispers rose instantly. The groom stepped forward sharply. This is absurd. You have no idea what you're talking about. But Daniel did not react. Instead, he turned slightly toward the bride. And you, he said gently, were never given the full picture of what you were marrying into. The bride's face changed. Not dramatically at first. Just a subtle drop in certainty. A flicker of something breaking through confidence. The groom tried to speak again, louder this time, but his voice no longer carried the same control. Daniel placed a final document on the table. A signed agreement. Names. Dates. Numbers. Enough for the room to understand without explanation. The silence that followed was different now. Heavier. No longer confused. But aware. Guests who had been smiling moments earlier now avoided eye contact. Some shifted in their seats. Others stared at the groom as if seeing him for the first time. I stayed still, watching, not surprised, but attentive, because the story I thought I had already left behind had just taken a turn I did not expect. And for the first time that day, the groom was no longer in control of the room. The silence did not last. It fractured. At first, it was just a shift in breathing, a restless movement among the guests as the documents on the table became impossible to ignore. Then the bride spoke. Her voice was soft at first, almost uncertain. "Wait, what does that mean?" No one answered immediately. She looked at her husband, my ex-husband, searching his face for reassurance, for the version of him she believed she had married. But what she saw instead was tension, control slipping. "Tell me," she insisted louder now. "Is any of this true?" The groom turned sharply toward her. "Of course not. This is a setup. You're going to believe a stranger over me?" But the words didn't land the way they used to. Not anymore. The bride took a step back, lifting one of the documents with shaking hands. Her eyes moved quickly across the lines. Names, figures, transactions, each detail pulling something apart inside her expression. "This account. I remember you said it was just for business expansion." She looked up. "Why is my name connected to this?" A murmur moved through the crowd. The groom's voice rose. "That is not what you think it is." But he was no longer speaking to calm her. He was speaking to hold the room together. And it was already breaking. Guests began to shift in their seats. Whispers turned into conversations. Then conversations into standing bodies. One by one, people started to leave. Slowly at first. Then faster. The illusion of celebration dissolved into something uncomfortable. Something no one wanted to stay inside. A woman near the back whispered, "I think we should go," and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. A man avoided eye contact completely as he walked toward the exit. The music had stopped long ago, but now even the silence felt abandoned. The groom stepped forward again, trying to regain control. "This is my wedding," he said firmly. "Everyone sit down." But no one did. Not fully. Not anymore. The bride turned toward him, her eyes now filled with something sharper than confusion. Hurt. Recognition. "You told me everything was clean," she said quietly. "You said there was nothing to worry about." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. That small movement landed harder than any argument. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. Not just anger. Not just exposure. But collapse. The carefully built version of him, polished, admired, untouchable, was no longer holding its shape. I remained seated. Still. Observing. Not intervening. Not reacting. Because this was no longer something I needed to destroy. It was something that was already falling apart on its own. And in that moment, no one was celebrating anymore. The air outside the venue felt different. Lighter. Colder. As if the building behind us had been holding its breath for hours and finally released it all at once. Guests were still leaving in small groups, their voices low, their footsteps quick against the marble steps. Luxury cars waited at the entrance, engines running, doors opening and closing in silence that felt heavier than conversation. I stepped away from the crowd and walked toward the side garden. Neatly trimmed hedges. White flowers bending slightly in the evening wind. A fountain that continued to flow as if nothing inside the hall had changed. For a moment, I thought I would finally be alone. But then I heard footsteps behind me. Slower. Hesitant. I turned. The bride stood a few meters away. No longer glowing under soft wedding lights. No longer surrounded by celebration. Just human. Her dress still carried elegance, but her posture had shifted. The confidence she wore inside had cracked into something quieter. She stopped in front of me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Only the sound of water from the fountain filled the space between us. Then she finally said, her voice low, almost tired, "I thought I won." I didn't respond immediately. She looked down at her hands, as if trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. "I thought," she continued, swallowing slightly, "that I took something from you. That I replaced you. That I became the one he chose." Her words weren't cruel. They were confused. And underneath them was something more fragile. Regret. I took a slow breath. Not out of anger. Not out of victory. Just clarity. When I spoke, my voice was steady. You did not take my life. She looked up. You took the version of it I had already decided to leave. The words hung in the air. Still. Unmoving. For a second, she didn't react. As if she was waiting for a second meaning to appear. But it didn't. Because there wasn't one. I continued quietly. I was already walking away before you ever stood beside him. You just arrived in the part of the story where I had already stopped fighting for it. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. The fountain behind us kept flowing, uninterrupted. A symbol of something continuing even after everything else had collapsed. She looked at me differently now. Not as a rival. Not as a threat. But as someone she no longer understood. And in that silence, I realized something simple. I had not come here to lose anything. And I had not come here to win anything either. I had already moved on. Long before anyone else noticed. She stayed there for a moment longer. Then slowly turned away, her footsteps fading back toward the broken celebration. I did not follow. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to chase. What I learned after losing everything, I stood outside the venue for another minute after she left. The night had settled fully now. City lights stretched across the distance in long reflections. And the air carried that strange calm that only comes after something breaks, and there is nothing left to hold together. Behind me, the wedding continued, but only technically. The music had returned at some point. Soft. Uncertain. People were still inside. But whatever celebration had existed earlier no longer belonged to the room. I looked once toward the entrance. Through the glass, I could see movement. Conversations. Confusion. People trying to act normal after watching something impossible to ignore. Months ago, I would have thought this moment would feel satisfying. That seeing everything collapse would somehow balance what happened to me. But standing there, I realized something unexpected. I did not feel victorious. I felt free. Because the truth was, this wedding was never my ending. Not the divorce. Not the invitation. Not even tonight. For a long time, I thought losing my marriage meant losing my future. I thought leaving meant failure. I thought being replaced meant I had not been enough. But none of those things turned out to be true. Sometimes people leave before they leave. Sometimes relationships end quietly long before anyone admits it. And sometimes what feels like being abandoned is actually being released. I smiled slightly at that thought. Not because I was happy about what happened, but because I finally understood it. Truth does not always arrive on time. Sometimes it appears after signatures, after photographs, after celebrations, after everyone has already chosen their side. But when it finally arrives, it changes everything. Not always loudly, not always dramatically. Sometimes it simply removes the illusion. And once you see clearly, you cannot go back. I adjusted my coat and started walking toward the street. No dramatic gouvier. No final glance. No need to prove I was okay. My heels echoed softly against the stone path as I moved farther from the venue. The city ahead felt open, wide, unwritten. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not leaving something behind. I was walking toward something new. Without anger. Without regret. And without looking back. This completes the full emotional arc and creates a strong ending suitable for audience retention and reflection.